Hey, this is Victor Antonio, and welcome to my presentation here based on the book Sales Ex Machina, How AI is Changing the World of Selling. I co-wrote this with James Glenn Anderson, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how we got together to write this book and what were some of the motivations to write the book. Now, one of the things I want to do is start out with the state of selling. Where are we today when it comes to selling? Now, I want to talk about this first because it provides context when we talk about digital transformation and AI and how it impacts selling. So, for example, let's go through some of the data you may already know. Most people will look at 10 sources of information before deciding to reach out and contact, let's say, a supplier, right? So, in other words, we have more informed buyers. And depending on whose book or whose studies you choose to read and believe, the buyer is now 57 to maybe 74% into the buying cycle. Again, more knowledgeable buyers. Also, when you look at the win-loss ratio, cross-sectional studies show that on average you'll win about 40% of your deals, but you'll lose about 60%. Again, cross-sectional study. But what's interesting is when you crack open the 60%, 20% of that business went to your competition. What happened to the other 40%? No decision. So your biggest competitor isn't really your competitor, it's the status quo. People not making a decision. So again, challenges we're facing. Also, we see an increase in the number of people involved in making a buying decision. We're now looking at 6.8, let's just call it 7 people involved in making a buying decision, which means sales cycles are going to get extended, but also the complexity of closing the deal increases dramatically. 77% of buyers found no value when a salesperson was presenting to them. In other words, the message wasn't resonating. They didn't understand their business. They weren't providing real value. Also, 8% of buyers believe that sales rep is knowledgeable about their business. In other words, 92% of them don't believe that the buyer, or the seller rather, really understands the buyer's business. And because they don't understand their business, they're more likely to say no or no decision. 53% of salespeople actually achieve their quota. Now, that number has been going down according to Sales CSO Insights for the last 4 or 5 years. So again, less people are achieving quota. When you put this all together, you realize it's getting harder to sell out there. Now, when you talk about actual sales activity, depending again on what source you believe, this is how much time salespeople are actually spending on actual sales activities, between 35 and maybe 36, 37%. The question is, what happens to that difference? Where is that time lost? Now, would you agree with the following? Today's buyer is more knowledgeable, more demanding, more sophisticated, and more cautious. They're also less tolerant, less gullible, and less trusting, and less loyal. Would you agree with that? I would. Now, in 2011, I think it was December, the Challenger Sale, the book came out. And in that book, I plucked out this little study that they did. Drivers of customer loyalties. What are they? Well, 19% is company and brand impact. 19% is company and brand impact. 19% is also product and service delivery. 9%, only 9% is value to price ratio. Where's the 53% coming from? It's the buying experience. Now, the buying experience adds up to this, right? Offers unique, valuable perspectives on the market. That's you, the salesperson. What are you offering in terms of unique, valuable perspectives on the market? Help clients navigate alternatives. That's what they're looking for. Helps clients avoid making the wrong decisions. Help them avoid landmine or buyer's regret. Also, you as a salesperson have to provide ongoing advice and consultation. They want you to educate them on new issues and outcomes in the market. And you got to be easy to buy from. Now, I love this graph because it tells you what today's buyers really want. It's not about price. It's not about brand. It's not about product and service delivery. It's about the buying experience. Look, we've reached the level today where all products or all service have reached a certain sense of parity. In other words, the difference between one product A and product B, there's not that much different, or service A, service B. Even if you came up with a differentiating factor, somebody's going to copy that within a month or 2 or 3 months, whatever it may be, right? So it's all about product parity or service parity. So the differentiator in today's market is how we treat our customers. But here's the important part. Most people think because sellers or buyers rather into the buying cycle, 57, almost 80%, whatever it may be, They think that salespeople are irrelevant. I disagree. We as salespeople are more relevant than ever. Why? Too many options. People are confused. They need salespeople with the right knowledge to help them buy. That's where the buying experience comes in. If we can offer unique and valuable insight, if we can guide them, help them make a buying decision, they're more likely to make a decision than to not make a buying decision at all. Now, I also want to talk about this. I call it the AI Wedge. Gartner came out with this forecast in January, or April rather, and basically it talks about the real business value of artificial intelligence. Now, I've already talked about the state of the market, right? What's going on, how buyers are reacting, how sellers are actually trying to sell into a hard market. But how can AI help us? What's the real value? This simple chart illustrates that our job is to create wedges, right? Increase revenue, reduce costs. If we can use AI to do that, then we're going to be more profitable as a company. Here's some data points. The global business value from AI is projected to total $1.2 trillion in 2018, $3.9 trillion in 2022. What do we mean by business value? Let's really define that. What's what the graph is showing? How do we use AI, machine learning, to actually increase revenue? How do we find new business, new markets? I'm going to talk about that. But also, how can we use AI to reduce costs? And if we can do both, obviously we'll increase our profitability. That's the business value that AI offers to today's market. Now, let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was in Korea, and I came across this. And basically, it's a display in the train station, and on the wall, it's a display that mimics basically a supermarket. And you as a buyer can break out your phone, order stuff from the display, so to speak, and by the time you get home, guess what? The products or produces will be there. Now think about the buying experience when you see something like this. This makes it totally easy for the buyer to buy. This is what customers are looking for. So when we talk about, the customer experience, we're talking about a frictionless economy. How can I buy things easier? How can you, as a seller, make my life as a buyer easy? Now, when I saw this, I was like, this is interesting. Now, a couple of days later, I did a presentation for a large healthcare company. And again, it's one of those moments in your life you go, this is interesting. So I just finished seeing that display. Right? A couple of days later, I'm in this healthcare company, and they took me into their call center. And let's say they had about 200 people in that call center. Well, in that call center, let's say you have 200 people who make 100 calls a day. Run the numbers, let's call that 20,000, if my numbers are correct, right? 20,000 calls. Let's say that you close 20% of that. Well, that still leaves you with, 16,000, right? Calls. The question is, if you made 100 calls, you as the caller made 100 calls, let's keep it simple, 100 calls, and you closed 20%, you still have 80 calls to deal with. The question is, who do you call back? Well, this company was using AI, natural language processing as well, to basically listen to the conversations, right? Listens to the conversation. So I am talking to you. I'm trying to sell you some type of insurance product. It would listen to the conversation and record it. It would then later on dissect the audio. It would look at what the customer said, analyze it for intonation, stress and voice, keyword cloud. It would create what keywords were actually used. How often were those keywords used? What phrases did they use? How fast were they talking? There were other patterns you can look for. And based on that information, the machine learning algorithm determined who warranted a callback and who didn't. Now stop and think about that for a moment. Basically, it prioritized who you should call back and who you shouldn't. So again, go back to my example. If I have 100 calls, I close 20%, I have 80 calls. Now, who do I call first? Who's more likely to close than not? Now, remember the data point I showed you earlier. Today, salespeople are spending about 37% of their activities on selling. What are they doing with the difference? They're probably trying to research, figure out what customers to call first, maybe going on LinkedIn, looking for data, doing all these things, but the sales activity itself. Well, using this machine learning program, the machine basically told them, here's who you need to call back, and here's the order in which you should call them back. These are the deals more likely to close. And when I saw that, it was like a light went off. That was really the motivation for Sales Ex Machina, the book, because at that moment I realized by using machine learning, artificial intelligence, we could be more effective at selling. Now, one more thing. As the conversation was being recorded, they're also recording my voice. Let's say I am the seller. And the system would actually figure out that if a customer had a question and I didn't respond adequately, it would highlight that I didn't do that. It would also highlight certain things that the customer brought up, and it would actually do these little pop-up scripts. Or if the customer said, hey, what about product B from competitor A? It would actually have a little pop-up script that would allow you to read that. In other words, the machine was listening. So within that, I'm actually being trained at the same time, but later on, my manager can actually review that audio, review the data, review the conversation, and using machine learning, it could give me recommendations on what courses I should be taking to become better at making phone calls. That right there was the moment I go, this is incredible. These tools will allow us to be more effective, focus more on selling time, but also be able to give our customer, as we're talking to them, better data using these scripts that are actually produced by these algorithms. And that was how this book was born, Sales Ex Machina. Now, a little background. My background is I started out as an electrical engineer, got an MBA. Eventually, I made a decision to go into sales, and I did exceptionally well in sales and moved up the ranks and eventually became a trainer and author. Now, my co-author, James Anderson, well, he was working on AI expert systems back in '84, and I was actually, tutored under him. I learned from him. So it was interesting how I went the sales route. He still went the engineering route. He has like 5 degrees, 2 bachelors, 2 masters, and 1 doctorate. It's all technical degrees. And when I called him, after I'd written the outline of the book, I said, hey, I'm writing this book on how AI and sales are really coming together to make us more effective and make a company more profitable. And he's like, I'm in. I want to be part of this book. And so I was really happy to partner with him on this book because I look at it from a sales perspective. He looks at it from a scientist perspective. And that's where the sales and scientist piece really come together in this book. Now, in my book, Sales Ex Machina, I highlight some of these companies that are doing some revolutionary things with technology. Alexa, everybody knows that. And Amazon with their AWS system, basically, it's the cloud platform. I look at IBM Watson. Companies like Phrasee, Nest, Boomerang, Displayer, Salesforce, and their Einstein systems, and so on. So all this is discussed in the book. So what I want to do now is highlight some of the things that are in the book that I think you might find fascinating. My goal here is to get you to think about this stuff, really get you to think about artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital transformation, and begin to think about how can I apply this to my business. Whether you're a small company or a large enterprise, how can you apply it? Let's go through some concepts here. When we look at machine learning or artificial intelligence, it's gone through this progression. If you look at assist, let's start at the lowest level, assist. Let's say a little calculator, okay? That's kind of machine learning, right? It's doing little calculations for you. Administrate, that's when the computer came in, and now you can actually run programs. Automate. If you have autoresponders or things that automatically respond, that's where we're kind of at, when we can automate certain things like chatbots and so forth. Today, we're at the point of augmenting. What do I mean by that? You can't have a machine do it all. In other words, it's almost impossible in the sales realm. So there's going to be a combination of salesperson and machine learning. Data, and again, you the individual. You are augmented by the machine. The programs today, the algorithms that are being used today to help you make better decisions will augment your ability to sell more effectively. Now, you're often going to hear about AI in a general sense, but I like to be very specific. Narrow AI, NAI stands for a narrow application of artificial intelligence. When we look at, when you see those things about, the Terminator, this thing's going to, just take over the world type of thing, Skynet and all that, what we're talking about is general AI, beyond the point of what they call singularity, where the machine can think for itself beyond the human. Well, I don't think we're there yet. Maybe it's another 30, 40 years. Who knows? Nobody really knows. But right now, we're in the augmentation phase. That means how can we use machine learning? How can we use data, with all the processing power to augment our ability to sell more effectively, grow our business, or just be more efficient in general? That's where we're at today. And so I put this little graph together because it kind of shows you a progression of what's happening. when you look at what's happened in the last maybe 15, 20 years, I'm going to call that S-curve, and this is an S-curve, right? That S-curve is connectivity. Search came about, right? PayPal began to take payments online. Amazon, eBay began selling online and delivering. We take it for granted that this technology, this ability to use the internet this way is no more than, 15 to 20 years old. This is not that old. And so we're hitting the top of that S-curve where now these companies are maturing. The next step is obviously the AI S-curve. So we're going to jump off the connectivity S-curve. The infrastructure is in place. We have high-speed modems. We had fiber optic to the home. All this infrastructure is in place. We have processing power. We're now using it. But now it's time to jump off that S-curve onto the AI S-curve. And the big push has been obviously big data. Internet of Things, devices everywhere, whether it's your phone, a Fitbit, whatever it may be. We are spewing all kinds of data into the dataverse, but also processing and storage. The ability to process information, process high, convoluted algorithms like deep learning algorithms, we can now do that within days. In other words, we can run a program that would typically have taken maybe, 3 to 4 months. We can now maybe run that in 3 to 4 hours. So the processing power and our ability to store all this data as storage costs come down makes all this possible. And again, the more data they have, the more processing you do, the smarter the algorithms get, the smarter the programmers get. Now, I want to draw one analogy here. Let's go back maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We were looking for blue oceans, new markets to go after. I think what's happened today is that we're a global economy now. And what's happened, all the blue ocean stuff is taken up. In other words, there's red ocean versus blue ocean, right? There's a wonderful book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And essentially, it boils down to this. If you try to compete in a market where it's hyper competitive, you're going to get into a bloody war on pricing, typically. That would create a red ocean. What you want to do is find some blue oceans where nobody is competing today, right? That was the premise of the book in short. And today, we found many of the blue oceans, right? It's hard to find a fresh, open, big market. In other words, once we went global, I think the end of the blue ocean strategy was pretty much diminished. But now, what we're going to do is use data to find blue puddles. Right? That's my play on words with blue ocean. By blue puddles, I mean within the existing market you're playing in, within your domain, maybe there's specific market niches that you're not seeing. And that's where the algorithm and the data kicks in. Maybe the algorithm is able to highlight certain things that maybe you didn't see. Maybe it's able to predict what's going to happen. Again, using that data, using the algorithm, we can find all these, let's call them micro niches, or again, I'll just go back to blue puddles. And again, once we start finding all these blue puddles, add those up and you may have a blue ocean. Here's some examples of what I mean about using the predictive power of these new machines to actually find new customers. Now, again, it's all about the data. You know this. I don't need to repeat this. Data is the new oil. That's the common phrase. So one of the examples I like to highlight is Target. There's this wonderful story by Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit. And I'll give you a short version. It's about a father who was living in Minneapolis. His 14-year-old daughter was receiving, everything that has to do with maternity and motherhood, right? Just catalogs on that. And so the story goes, he goes to Target, calls for the manager, basically yells at the manager and says, hey, are you just trying to encourage, teenage pregnancy? And the manager didn't know what to say, wasn't aware of that. And he says, I'll do my best to make sure it doesn't happen again. We'll take your name off the list, so forth and so on, right? Well, 2 weeks later, the manager calls the man who came in and basically says, I just want to make sure you're not getting this content anymore, right? Well, at that point, the father confirms that his daughter was indeed pregnant. In other words, the predictive analytics of the system at Target was able to predict, even before the father knew, that the daughter was pregnant. Now, why is this important for Target to catch them early? Well, think about it. If Target can catch a person, in this case a young mother, early on in the cycle, once they start buying from Target, they know that they almost have a captured market. In other words, if the mom goes to Target and starts buying from Target as opposed to, let's say, Walmart, if they go to Target, that person over their lifetime, by let's say for the next 5 or 10, maybe 15 years, will go to Target to buy more. items. In other words, that customer's value has just gone up. Target knows that what it needs to do is capture, in this case, young mothers early to get them to come in and buy and establish that habit. Another example was really interesting. The CEO of Aetna was talking about how they're able to predict if somebody has type 2 diabetes just by the fact that they changed their shampoo, or rather their soap, right, or detergent. And so what they figured out is that when you got type 2 diabetes, you become more sensitive, so you switch detergent more often. You think there's something wrong with the product you're buying. So now think about this again. They're able to predict that someone has type 2 diabetes before the actual person knows that they actually have it. This is the power of prediction. Now, extend this analogy and say, how can we use that power to predict who will buy our products? In fact, what products will they want next? Amazon uses recommendation engines to always recommend something else to you so they can either upsell you or cross-sell you. So the power of data is really there. As James Glenn Anderson, again, the co-author, likes to say, he always says, it's all in the patterns, bro. That's what he actually says. And what he says, within the data, what we're looking for are patterns. And once we can use these machine learning algorithms to find patterns, we can now direct our marketing and sales resources to be able to sell more effectively. Next, I borrowed this outline from the folks over at McKinsey Global Institute. These are some different analytical techniques that they use to actually categorize data. Now, what I did was actually added some more definition. For example, when we look at a classification example, I'll just read the first one. To identify whether an image contains a specific type of product or object, we want to identify brands and location. I'm going to give you an example of how today, if you post a picture, they can actually look at the image, basically look at if it's a male, female, look at their race, gender, obviously, maybe even guess their age, but also highlight what brands they're using and maybe even look at the background to see where they're at. Now, again, this is just more data. It's unstructured data that the machines can use to predict what you will buy. When we look at, for example, continuous estimation, that's a great technique for forecasting and price optimization. Obviously, forecasting what you're going to sell next quarter because that will drive inventory. It can also forecast price optimization. What's the optimal price you need to bid in order to win the business without leaving money on the table? How about clustering? Again, we talked about blue puddles. Where are these clusters at that we can sell to? Optimization. My favorite example, and I'll talk about it a little bit, is UPS. How do you optimize routes to make delivering more effective? Anomaly detection. Again, look at credit card industry. They're using machine learning, artificial intelligence to detect fraud. Now, ranking, lead prioritization. For example, again, get back to my example. Who do you call first? I've called 100 people. I closed 20. I got 80 left in the bucket. Who do I call? Again, the machine can actually prioritize that for you. I've already mentioned Amazon. They use recommendation engines, or Netflix, right? They can upsell you or cross-sell you on a product. And then data generation, again, some of the algorithms out there can now actually write articles on your behalf, and I'll show you an example of that. Let's look at the UPS example first. This is always my favorite because they figured out that if the trucks don't make any left turns, and by the way, once in a while they'll have to make a left turns, by basically using an algorithm that minimizes the amount of left turns, they can actually increase their efficiency. What they found is that when you have to make a left turn, one, the waiting time at the intersection is longer, loss of time. Two, they also found out that left turns are usually a situation where you're more likely to get in an accident than not, as opposed to making a right turn. So when they added this into their algorithm, their routing patterns, here's what they've saved. 10 million gallons of fuel a year, right? And 6 to 8 fewer miles driven per route. Also, 100,000 metric tons of CO emissions a year. That's how much they're saving. Think about these numbers. A simple algorithmic chain. Don't go left. Try to make as many rights as you can to get to your location. By using the power of the machine, artificial intelligence, they were able to figure out that by simply using this routing technique, they could actually save money and deliver quicker. Now, by 2018, 20% of all business content will be authored by machines. So here's an example for you. Here's option A. Now read that. Things looked bleak for the Angels when they trailed by 2 runs in the 9th inning. But Los Angeles recovered thanks to a key single from Vladimir Guerrero to pull out a 7-6 victory over the Boston Red Sox at Fenway Park on Sunday. Then there's option B. Same thing, the University of Michigan baseball used a 4-run fifth inning to salvage the final game in its 3-game You can read the rest. The question is, which one was written by a machine and which one was written by a human? What do you think? A? B? The answer's in the book. So check out the book, Sales Ex Machina. I know, you hate that, right? But there it is. All right. You've probably heard of this example, Netflix. Look at their data set. Remember, the more people, download stuff from Netflix, the more data they're collecting. 30 million plays a day. 4 million ratings by subscribers. I mean, the amount of data is incredible. And what they found out when they looked at a series like The House of Cards, what they figured out using patterns, as my friend James would say, it's all in the patterns, bro. What they figured out is that they had a hit. There was House of Cards in the UK. That was already a hit. But they also found that if they used actors like Kevin Spacey and director like David Fincher, that combination would be a hit. How do they know it would be a hit? Did they believe it would be a hit? So much so that they greenlit 2 seasons with no pilot. I mean, think about that. They gave the go-ahead for 2 seasons without even looking at a pilot. That's how much faith they had in their predictive algorithm, which begs the question, how much faith will you have in your data? Because that's big. If you don't have a lot of faith in your data, guess what? You're not going to really use this effectively. So think about this. Many people have the data, but when the machine predicts something, will you actually use it? Now, let's go over to Wired Magazine real quick. Kevin Kelly had this great phrase. He called it cognification, and he compared it to electricity. He says, you take a product, you add electricity to it, there you go, right? And so anything you can think of, we added electricity just to make it more functional. He says AI is a utility. Now think about that. AI is a utility. It's like electricity, he says. So for example, if you have a car, you add AI, you now have driverless cars, right? Also, if you take a refrigerator, you add some AI, and guess what? It's now a very intelligent refrigerator. It'll probably say, hey, no cheesecake today for you, right? So what we're doing in sales is we're taking our CRM, and what we want to do is cognify it and basically have this predictive information. That's what we want. So this is what's changing. Think of AI as electricity, and you begin to see the power of where this is going. Here's one company that's really taking it to the next level, Affectiva. Affectiva can now monitor your facial patterns, right, to make certain determinations about your emotional state. It takes your facial patterns, cognifies it with AI, and it makes predictions. Let me show you some data here. It has the world's largest emotional data repository, 87 countries, 6.5 million faces analyzed. Now, what does this do for you? Now, think about it. It'll monitor levels of a driver's fatigue and distraction. So if you're driving for a long distance, based on your facial expressions, it can tell whether you're tired or not. That's amazing. And what it'll probably do is probably vibrate maybe the wheel. Also, addresses handoff between driver and semi-autonomous car. What does that mean? It may get to the point where the car will say, you know what, I think I need to take over at this point because you're too tired. So it'll negotiate that. It'll make that decision for you based on how you're looking. Last but not least, road rage, right? It'll look at you, say, okay, you're a little angry, and it'll monitor your state. It'll probably say at this point, you might want to pull off. There's your Starbucks, coffee shop over there. You might want to take 10 minutes. One actually changes your playlist. So if you're listening to heavy metal and you're really upset, it'll maybe change it to classical music and maybe put you in a better state. So amazing stuff. Also, this is the unstructured data I referred to earlier, is that in this case, there's a company called Netra that can actually look at an image. And in this case, look at the top image. It can look at the individuals in the image, right? Kind of get their demographics, right? And also look at the background and see where they're at. But now they have an idea of who the person is, what brands they like, and guess what? Where they travel to. On the right-hand side is no different. Again, these are things that we're going to be able to use. Now, all these pictures, they're posted online. This is called unstructured data. Think of structured data as tables, and this is unstructured data. And the challenge is always, how do you take unstructured data, structure it so the machine can use it? That's another topic. But bottom line, even the pictures that you're posting today are providing the machines information that they can use. If I'm a company and I'm marketing, let's say in this case, North Face, then maybe I want to market more aggressively to you based on that. And I also know that you like skiing, so maybe I want to market that type of product or sell my data to a ski company, whatever the case may be. I want to look at my data as an asset and therefore maybe sell it or use it more effectively. Now, when you put it all together, we're looking for behavioral change. Again, what we're trying to do is get the salesperson to spend more time in the CRM, if I can put it that way, or the sales acceleration platform, right? So we're moving from a system of records where we just have a bunch of spreadsheets or just a big database, with names, address, company, what they've bought in the past and price. We're trying to move over to a system of intelligence where we now take all these things I've talked about so far and use them to actually assess whether a customer is more likely to buy. Again, for example, think about LinkedIn. What if I have a customer in my database, but I also can pull pictures that they've posted online, maybe from their vacation? If I can pull that unstructured data, move it into my system, great. What if I can take all their postings? What if I can take all the things they like? What if the system could take all this information and then basically suggest a good approach with this customer? Again, this is what we're moving towards. It's how do you bring all this data together in such a way, in a cohesive fashion, where salespeople will be able to use it more effectively. I think that's still the challenge. There's a lot of data that we can use, but again, using it more effectively, we still need to get there. But again, there's a lot of tools out there, a lot of companies doing some really cool things to help us, guide us in lead prioritization, lead scoring, finding the right customers, even helping us with what to say, how to say it, when to reach out to that customer. So again, all this is really coming together, but the end goal is we want to move to a system of intelligence, a sales acceleration platform, also known as, let's call it a CRM on steroids, where now we can work within the CRM. So instead of just spending maybe 36, 37% of our time in the CRM, we want to live as a salesperson within that CRM. Now, having said that, when we look at a company's asset, this is a typical stack, right? The brand is an asset. Any trademarks or patents you have is an asset, intellectual property. The data that you collect is an asset, real estate, human capital, so forth and so on. These are all assets that a company possesses. But here's an interesting change. The new asset is the conversations, or are the conversations. The conversations you now have with the customer. Now, let me slow down, because I think this to me is one of the biggest things that machine learning is bringing to the game, so to speak. For example, if I am reaching out to a customer, and again, remember there's 7 buyers involved in a B2B deal. Now, all these conversations, that means emails and voicemails, are actually being captured within the CRM. The technology will permit you to do that. Because I'm capturing all those conversations, emails, voicemails, exchanges, the machine is analyzing for sentiment. What do they feel? How do they feel? Positive, negative, right? It's being captured. How they respond, how fast they respond, how much information they give back when they respond. Is it a short response? Is it a lengthy response? What words are they using? All this information through natural language processing will allow us to make a determination whether this is going to be a good deal or a bad deal. Does this deal warrant more attention or less attention in the priority stack as we prioritize our leads? But think about this. If a person were to leave tomorrow, that salesperson were to leave tomorrow, back in the day before machine learning here, if that person leaves, they take that with them. In other words, the relationships and the conversations go with them. But today, because we're capturing the majority of information, that means the data, the exchanges, the voicemails, the emails, we're capturing that data. That now becomes a new corporate asset for us. What does that mean? One, we now own the asset. It doesn't leave when the employee leaves, right? We have that. Also, time to value. If I have to train somebody coming in for the first time, I have existing conversations/data. So my time to value to get them to that point where they're actually, selling faster and more effectively, quicker, is on my side. Also, your client acquisition costs go down. What does that mean? Because I have conversations, because I have this data and I own it, the ability to capture new clients might be that much easier. And last but not least, if I own this data, can I monetize that data? Can I sell this data? Again, different question, different conversation, different presentation, but something to think about. All right, Homestretch. I like to break things down and make things easy because, again, we can get lost in this whole digital transformation world. But here's why I look at selling. There's three things any large corporation or enterprise wants to focus in on, and that is increase revenue, reduce costs, and expand their market share. That will lead, obviously, to profitability, right? It's the goal of any big company, right? So our job is to increase revenue, reduce costs, or expand market share, which leads to profitability. So what are the knobs that we can turn here? Well, there's 5 knobs you can turn, right? You can increase the number of leads or opportunities. You can also increase the average deal size. You can actually shorten the sales cycle, better conversations so you can close more deals, or last but not least, buying frequency. I know I jumped around on that one a little bit, sorry. But the buying frequency is that they bought once, maybe I can get them to buy another time in the next couple of months. In other words, the number of times they buy. Let's go through them. There are only 5 buttons that you can work with to increase your profitability. And that is, again, increase the number of opportunities, increase the deal size, increase your conversion rate, your close rate, buyer frequency, get them to buy more often, or shorten your sales cycle. So when we look at AI, the question is, how do you apply it to that? Those 5 things. How can we move those 5 dials? And if we can move those 5 dials in a positive direction, then we will impact increased revenue, reduce costs, or expanded market share, which in the end will give us more profit. Now, having said that, the machine learning, all the data that we're currently using and analyzing needs to help us do 4 things. What can we start doing that we're not doing? What should we stop doing that we are doing but we're losing money? Or maybe we're doing something but we need to do more of it. Or maybe we're doing something and we need to do less of it. And so we're using machine learning to kind of guide us a little bit, to kind of move us in that direction, to guide us on what we should stop, start, more, or less, right? Those are the kind of things we need to look at. And again, the model's complete here. If we have the right data, if we have the right algorithms, they're going to produce the right insights for us. And because they've produced the right insights for us, we now know whether to do more, less, start, or stop. And again, all these to move the 5 buttons at the bottom. And again, use machine learning to give you the insights, executable insights that you can implement within your company. And so again, when you look at the battery, what can we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? And again, that will move, increase revenue, reduce costs, or expand market share, which will actually shift profitability. So that to me is the AI sales machine. Now, this is the model I would suggest you have in your head. Our job, your job, I should say, if you haven't started using data, using machine learning, or even predictive analytics on steroids, then maybe this is a good model to start with. And what I would suggest is that maybe pick a department within your company. It doesn't have to be sales necessarily. It could be operations, could be HR, could be general administration, whatever it may be. Pick a department and then figure out within that department, where can I apply, where can we capture data, analyze data to become more efficient? And again, you can do this beyond the sales realm. And last but not least, here's what I say. Artificial intelligence equals actionable insights. If it doesn't produce actionable insights by department or things that you can execute on, start, stop, more or less, then it's really not helping you in any way. So again, I hope this has been helpful. For more information on myself or James Anderson, please go to salesexmachina.com. I thank you for your time. Take care.